This following program is run by an untrained professional with no credentials. All events talked about are allegedly real and may seem unsettling to some listeners. If you've ever been outside at night and looked towards the stars, whether with a telescope or with your own eyes, one thought is almost guaranteed to cross your mind. What truly lies behind these stars you see? You may think to yourself, perhaps we're all alone in this universe. These two thoughts alone gather more questions than answers. For many years, people have claimed to have seen many strange things in the sky. These strange things are often unexplainable to the eyewitnesses. Some people see these objects and will dismiss them as natural phenomena, such as the sun or a plane. Some will say otherwise and claim the mysterious object is from beyond our solar system. Not one person truly knows where they come from. Not one person can even prove they exist. But one thing is for sure. People who have claimed to have seen a UFO are often never the same. The mark these sightings leave behind in an eyewitness's mind is unforgettable and can change their respective reality permanently. The best way to handle these events is to break them down into four main categories. A close encounter of the first kind. The most common type of encounter, when a single eyewitness or multiple eyewitnesses witness something in the sky. These encounters usually have little to no evidence to back them up, and often don't last long. When a witness encounters an object in the sky, but does not have any kind of evidence such as a photograph or a video, the sighting will likely be put into this category. A close encounter of the second kind. The second most common type of encounter. This type of encounter is when multiple eyewitnesses, or a single eyewitness, not only sees an object in the sky, but also has some sort of evidence to back up the encounter. These encounters can be proven as possible easier because of the evidence that backs them up. When an eyewitness is able to take a photograph or a video of the object, The case will often be put into this category. A close encounter of the third kind. This type is one of the most uncommon classifications, made popular by the 1977 Spielberg film. This encounter is when not only does an eyewitness have evidence such as a video or a photo, but the eyewitness also encountered life forms around the mysterious object. If an eyewitness saw a landed UFO with multiple aliens around the craft, it would be considered this category. A close encounter of the fourth kind. This encounter is often the most feared and most infamous, an alien abduction. There have been many tales of people taken from the streets or even from their homes aboard one of these objects and experimented on by the beings inside. Here in New England, we have experienced all of these encounters many times before. Some consider New England to be one of the greatest hotspots for UFO sightings in the whole nation. Today, I'm going to be talking about 3 Pacific encounters that took place here in New England. These 3 encounters are some of the most well-known and most infamous sightings to this day. Today, we'll be talking about the first ever UFO sighting that took place in America. One of the first ever photographic pictures of a UFO, and possibly the most terrifying and unnerving abduction story ever told. Braindead Broadcast presents New England's Tales from Beyond. This first story takes place in 1639. The exact date is unknown, but it is believed to have taken place in late February of that year. The tale goes that a mysterious light in the sky was reported multiple times in Boston by the Muddy River. This particular event is famous because of the history behind it. The sighting was reported almost 400 years ago, and as you're probably guessing right now, the story I'm about to tell is in fact the first ever reported sighting of an unidentified flying object in America. On the night of March 1st, 1639, John Winthrop, a former Massachusetts Bay governor, would write a mysterious entry into his journal. Winthrop's entry would tell a story that happened earlier that year. A man whom he named James Irvell was with 2 other men on the Muddy River at night. As they were paddling upstream towards Boston, one of the men looked up to the late night sky and noticed something off. The other crew members aboard soon noticed it too, and they described it as a great light similar to a fireball flying through the air. The witnesses said the following quotes: "It moved as swiftly as an arrow, and it contracted into the figure of a slide. When it stood still, it flamed up and was about 3 yards square. This object lit up the night sky like no other light source at the time. The 3 witnesses were left baffled as this object followed them upstream for almost 4 hours. There is not a lot known about how exactly the crew members reacted, or even what they did during the sighting, but one can guess they were probably left horrified by this strange object in the sky. After almost 4 hours of being followed by the object, it finally disappeared into the night. Once the light vanished, the crew members found themselves transported about 2 miles upstream, with no memory of how they got there. The object was never seen again by anyone." It is scary to think that these eyewitnesses were probably left in complete horror after this incident supposedly took place. What these men experienced is a common phenomenon in UFO sightings known as missing time. Missing time is often commonly seen in victims of alien abductions. These men might have been abducted by a strange light and had lost memory of ever happening to them. We may never know for sure though. I think the biggest question we need to answer for this case is how likely this story actually happened. The problem with this story is because of how long ago it was, it's hard for me to find any evidence for it. However, the reason I wanted to talk about this case is really simple. Because of the fact that this story was told before the concepts of UFOs or aliens visiting Earth even existed, I feel it's a perfect piece of evidence to prove the existence of extraterrestrial life. It originates from a time long before people would try to hoax things like this. I think this thought alone is enough to bring some more believability to this story. But just because it seems very unlikely for this case to be a lie, that doesn't mean what happened was indeed aliens. Let's examine 3 possible theories. What if this was completely made up by the men to get attention? Here's why this theory at first made a lot of sense to me. These men could have easily made up this story to grab the attention of the governor, in hopes that he would document it and get some fame from the story. This would make sense because these men were pretty much the only known witnesses to this event. But there's just one major problem with this theory. Like I've stated, during this time period, the concept of aliens was almost unheard of, along with the concept of UFOs or alien abductions. If this event was more recent, you could easily call this a publicity stunt for attention. But like I said, this was the first ever sighting in America. So if this was a lie, then what was the meaning behind the story? I feel like a story like this is very strange and very random for someone of the time period to make up. What if the mysterious object was simply a bird? It's actually very common for someone to see something in the sky and confuse it with something paranormal, when in reality, it's actually just a bird that was heavily reflected on by a light source, such as the sun. This theory could explain why it moved the way it did, and why it looked like a bright light. But some problems with this theory is at first, the object followed them for hours. It wasn't just a short sighting. The second problem was that this wouldn't explain the missing time that the witnesses experienced after the sighting. The third issue, and probably the most plausible issue, is that this sighting took place during the night. So how could there have been any sunlight reflecting on the supposed bird? After taking the other possibilities into account, I've come to realize that this theory is not at all out of the question. The possibility that this was indeed extraterrestrial is not at all implausible to me. I find there really isn't any evidence to use against this possibility, but there really isn't any evidence for the possibility that this was a supernatural occurrence either. Regardless, the event that took place before these men was unremarkable for sure. Overall, I give this case a 60% on the brain dead scale. Though I have little evidence for this story, I find that the possibility of this story being a lie or non-supernatural to be very low because of how long ago this story took place. It just doesn't make sense to me why someone from this time period would make up a story like this. We may never truly know what exactly happened that night of February 1639. This case will likely remain a mystery forever, with no possible way of proving its truth. However, sometimes cases have groundbreaking evidence that could easily be used to prove their plausibility, much like this next case.
But what would the experts say about this? An 8mm film of an object similar to the one Joe photographed was taken by Harold Trudell, a former observer for the Civil Air Patrol. Harold's close encounter took place in a wooded area of Cumberland.
Tell me what happened on that day in September in 1968. This is an area where basically there were UFO sightings in the area. And I was sky watching as usual. Then this object appeared from my left, coming in from my left, which would have been the east, and heading west. I seen this object, and I immediately picked up my camera and focused in on it.
This is Harold Trudell. He took 7 of the most iconic UFO photographs of all time. Harold and his legacy still reigns today. "29-year-old Harold Trudell had told many family members and friends that he had seen multiple mysterious flying discs in the sky by a field by West Renwick Road in Rhode Island. He claimed this area was a hotspot for UFO sightings. No one believed him, so one day, on June 10, 1967, around 12 p.m., when he had some free time, he took over a trip to West Renwick Road. He pulled over to the side of the road and got out his camera. His plan was to take a photo of what he claimed he spotted. He stood outside his car waiting about 20 minutes, and just as he predicted, it wasn't long before a large, dome-shaped object emerged from the sky. He quickly snapped a picture of it without any hesitation. He then took 6 more photographs of the mysterious object. After about an hour, the object disappeared. Trudell made his way back home with a strong sense of victory, as he knew he had the evidence to prove the existence of extraterrestrial life right in his hands. It is said shortly after the object left, the town of East Woonsocket mysteriously lost power. The reason why is still unknown to this day. I find the story to be really intriguing because of the impact it left behind. All 7 of the photos he took were groundbreaking at the time. Every news reporter was talking about this event in the papers. Every believer was trying to spread the word, and every photographer was trying to debunk the photos. When experts looked at these photographs, they concluded that they were real and that the story was all true. Locals were reportedly scared to go outside because of this event. The town wasn't the same for a while afterward. Now, I think it's my turn to take a look at these photographs and decide on an answer for myself. But first, I will start by talking about the story. One big issue I have with this story is how come no one else reported seeing anything weird in the sky? It appears that Harold was the only person to witness these objects, and it's not like they were seen in the middle of nowhere. They were seen in an open street with many houses in Rhode Island. Trudell also claimed that he had seen UFOs in this area many times before, yet no one else claimed to have seen them. Wouldn't it make sense for dozens of people to have reported seeing them? Another thing is that this sighting took place during the day. Overall, I believe the story has a lot of inconsistencies. The most mysterious part of the story was how the whole town lost power after the sighting occurred. The problem is, I can't really find any records of this actually happening. But I'm not saying it didn't happen because it definitely could have happened. But for all we know, there could have been many other reasons for this occurrence. Photographers claimed that these photographs were real and proven otherworldly back in 1967. Back then, there was no CGI or Photoshop, so it was a little bit harder to fake photos. One common technique that was used to fake photos back then was to make a model and throw it into the air. This was the easiest technique because it required little effort. All you needed was a model and your camera. The second technique commonly used was to hang a model on a string. This would allow the hoaxer to position the model in any way desired. Now, to test this out, I constructed some models to use as UFOs. I then went outside and tried out both of these techniques. I will now compare the photos I took to the ones that were taken by Harold Trudell. After comparing my photographs with the ones taken by Harold Trudell, I've noticed something eerily similar with them. I will put my photos side by side with the originals to show you what I'm talking about. One of the first things you can see in my photo is that around my UFO, you can see motion blur. This is a clear sign that something was moving close to the camera or thrown near the camera. If you look at the original photograph, you can clearly see what appears to be motion blur as well. The UFO also appears to be much closer to the camera than the things around it, making it look much more like it was thrown into the sky. Another thing that is similar is the size of the UFO. If you compare the size of the UFO in my picture to the trees around it, the UFO appears to be quite small. This can be seen as a clear sign that the object is smaller than the camera makes it appear to be. The actual size of the object can easily be determined by comparing it to the things around the object. In the original photo, this also appears to be the case to me. If you compare the size of the telephone poles and the trees around it, it appears to be quite small. Also similar, in these two photographs, I noticed that both also appear to be much smaller compared to surroundings, and I also notice that both UFOs in these pictures also appear to be much closer to the camera as well. Overall, this case scores a 5% on the brain dead scale. I feel this case's story has a lot of inconsistencies, and the photographs taken by Trudell are very unlikely to be authentic. The only thing that holds this case up for me is the fact that I cannot 100% prove the story to be false, nor can I 100% prove the photos to be faked. I can only judge the story with my own speculation and my own opinion on the photographs. Regardless, I find this case to be very unlikely to be true. The Betty and Barney Hill abduction is one of the most iconic UFO abduction stories ever told. This case is constantly talked about and remembered of. It tells the story of a married couple back in the 1960s who were driving home late one night and had an encounter with an unidentified flying object that would haunt them forever. Betty and Barney Hill were driving back to their home in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. The night was dark and there was a full moon out in the sky. The Hills were driving home from their honeymoon in Canada. The two of them were completely shot and exhausted and were silent for most of the car ride. The silence was soon interrupted when Betty, who was zoned out for most of the car ride, soon noticed something really strange. When Betty's eyes adjusted, she noticed what she was looking at was a large glowing orb in the sky. She described the light as bright green and circular in shape. It seemed to be really far away in the sky and nowhere near the ground. Betty dismissed this light as a planet and started to forget about it. But suddenly, she realized this object in the sky couldn't be a planet, because the object was now moving. It moved in erratic patterns across the sky, following them. Betty turned to Barney and pointed to the sky. As they kept driving, they noticed that the light was getting bigger and bigger. Barney floored it and turned back. The object in the sky started to speed up as well, slowly catching up to them. During this race, Betty rolled down the window and tried to get a closer look at the light. When she poked her head out the window, she could hear a strange sound. She described the sound as an electrical pulse. Barney stopped the vehicle and stepped outside the car. He was immediately blinded by the lights from the mysterious object. When his eyes adjusted to the light, the object finally came into view. The object was floating in midair just about 80 feet off the ground and was about 60 feet away from him. It made no movement and just floated there motionless, as if it was just waiting for him. With a pair of binoculars, Barney looked into the object.
And then I get out with the binoculars, and it is there. And I look, and it shifts over, and there it is up there.
Barney was met with a shocking sight. On the mysterious craft, there was what he described as a window that wrapped all around the object. As he looked closer into these windows, he saw about 11 humanoid beings that appeared to be staring right at him from inside. It is said that one of the creatures made contact with Barney.
How's he getting it to you? I can see it in his face. What did he tell you? Stay there and keep looking.
A sudden adrenaline rush hit Barney as he charged like thunder back over to his car. It was at this moment where the couple began to feel drowsy and dizzy. The next thing they remembered was waking up and finding themselves almost 40 miles down the road with not a single memory of how they got there. Betty and Barney drove home in complete dismay. Once they got home, they soon noticed that there was something else wrong. On the back of their car, there were scratches and dents all over the trunk that were not there before. They also soon noticed that both of their watches had stopped working, and pieces of Barney's shoes had been ripped off. The couple was silent about what happened to them, as they didn't want the public to think they were insane. Instead, they spent the next few weeks trying to remember what happened to them during the missing time they experienced. But no matter how much they tried, they just couldn't remember what happened. It was just 10 days after when Betty began to have very strange dreams. In these dreams, she recalled that strange men would visit her. They would have black eyes, gray skin, and no other facial features. These men would appear around her, wearing clothing that resembled a surgeon's uniform. These creatures would take her through a variety of inhumane experiments. She would then wake up from these dreams screaming. These nightmares continued for 5 days until they finally came to a stop. The couple now wanting to solve the mysteries of their missing time and the bizarre nightmares, Betty and Barney underwent hypnotherapy sessions with Dr. Benjamin Simon, who was a well-respected psychiatrist.
And so then I began to get worried, and I asked him, why it was taking so long with Barney. And he said, well, they were doing a few more tests with him, but he'd be right along in a minute.
In these sessions, the couple would recall horrific events from that night. The first thing they recalled was of Barney charging back to the car, screaming at Betty. Once inside the car, Barney attempted to outspeed the mysterious object. The object was soon to catch up with them, and the couple found themselves in grave danger. That's when Barney was soon to notice something in the distance in the middle of the road. There were dozens of humanoid creatures surrounding the road, blocking them from escaping. These humanoids allegedly broke into the vehicle and took Betty and Barney aboard the craft. They then recalled being taken for a number of inhumane experiments by the mysterious beings. Among all of the creatures, there was one who stood out from the rest. Betty referred to this being as the leader. The leader would stand off in the background and watch them silently as they were tortured by these beings. Most compelling of all, Betty allegedly was taken to a separate room by the leader. There, the leader showed Betty a star map. The being claimed it was a map of where they came from. The aftermath of this incident was almost just as mysterious as the sighting itself. The couple had found strange cuts and scars on themselves that were not there before. Betty found her dress to have mysterious stains and tears in it. But the mystery didn't end here. Around 2 in the morning the same night, Air Force radar allegedly picked up traces of an unidentified flying object in the same area, only adding more mystery to the story. The abduction of Betty and Barney Hill remains one of the most mysterious encounters in UFO history. What exactly happened that night on that loamy road may forever remain a mystery, lost among the stars. However, what's the truth behind it all? Well, I've put together some evidence that I found to strengthen this case's truth. First off, here's what I think strengthens this case. Betty and Barney provided consistent testimonies about their details of the abduction, including descriptions of the beings and the events that transpired under hypnosis. In a lot of cases of fakery that involve two parties, the two people involved often tell two different stories, or two slightly different stories that don't add up with each other. In this case, Betty and Barney both told very consistent stories that did not contradict each other, making them much more believable. However, this could just mean that the two of them had planned out what they were going to say to make sure their stories were more consistent. But I personally believe this is unlikely that this is the case because under hypnosis, the two of them were interviewed separately and had vastly different and random questions that would have been impossible for them to coordinate answers to all of them. Both Betty and Barney experienced physical effects after the alleged abduction, including strange marks on their bodies, damaged clothing, and a damaged car. These effects were also documented by medical professionals who had no idea how the couple could have gotten these strange marks. It is also said that these strange marks healed and disappeared much faster than normal. Betty and Barney showed real emotional pain and trauma as they recounted their experiences, showing that they truly believe in the reality of their abductions. Another thing shown in interviews with Betty and Barney is that two of them often refused to be interviewed or didn't want to be in the news spotlight. If they made this story up for attention, wouldn't they want the publicity and to be on camera? It just doesn't add up with me. One interesting thing was that there was more witnesses to this UFO than just Betty and Barney. Though there weren't any other witnesses to the actual abduction, There were in fact other people who reported seeing unusual lights in the same area on the same night of the incident, along with the sighting on the Air Force radar. Overall, I give the Betty and Barney Hill abduction a 71% on the brain dead scale. This case is really compelling and is constantly talked about in the UFO community. The reason I feel this case to be plausible is because of three really simple reasons. First, the other eyewitness accounts of seeing strange things in the sky and what the Air Force radar picked up. Second off, all the physical evidence. Very few cases have any form of physical evidence at all. The third reason and the final reason is the believability. I'm not talking about the story itself, but rather the behavior of Betty and Barney. They always acted as if they were traumatized by this encounter, and sometimes refused to be interviewed. This shows me that they may have genuinely been afraid that they might be called crazy by the public. However, the main thing holding me back from giving this case a greater rating is the simple fact that it could have easily been made up, and there really is no way to tell for sure. Overall, I believe this case has some strong evidence and believability to back it up, but the story could have easily been made up. Barney Hill passed away in 1969, just 8 years after the encounter, and Betty passed away in 2004. Even in more recent interviews before her death, Betty Hill would always hold the fact to her heart that she and Barney Hill were abducted by creatures from another world that night in 1961. It's likely this case will also remain a mystery forever. But of course, sometimes things may forever be left unexplained.